Welcome to Illuminate, to LGBTQIA plus storytelling podcast from the LGBTQIA plus ministry here at Christ Church NYC. Through these podcast episodes, we are exploring stories with special guests all about the intersection of queerness and spirituality. As I've been saying in each of these episodes, I really believe that queerness, that which we do as LGBTQIA plus folk, is good news for everybody because it shows us more about this reality that God has given us, a reality that is not black and white, that is not built by binaries, but is full of the sacred colors of life and love. So we talk about how LGBTQIA plus people are doing faith. We're talking about how other people of faith in the whole world can learn from our stories. And I am particularly excited for the story that we will hear today. For those who don't know me, my name is Tyler Heston. I am the Minister of Spiritual Formation and LGBTQIA plus development here at Christ Church. And it's a treat to welcome our guest today, Elizabeth Black. Elizabeth, will you introduce yourself?
Yes, Tyler, thanks so much for having me. Tyler has become such a dear friend. Fairly recently, I think we met in December and had a couple coffee dates and just hit it off and are both Bible and theology nerds. So it is a joy, Tyler, to be here. And such a pleasure. So yes, my name is Elizabeth Black, or sometimes I go by Elizabeth Delgado Black, which is my maiden name. And I'm adopting it more these days because I heard this queer woman on Instagram talking, and she's like, I don't know why straight couples don't just pick the cool name.
Amen.
Because that's what we do. We could just pick the cool name. And I was like, my name was way cooler than Black, so I'm bringing it back.
Bring it though. Black's fierce too, but
I love it. It's a great last name, but Delgado Black, I sound real spicy, so it fits. I live in New York City. I've been in New York for about 12 years. Moved here from Baltimore, where I grew up, and I moved to New York to do ministry. So prior to the work that I'm doing now, I was working in the kind of Jewish Christian space. My background is mission and mission work, and how do we bridge the gap culturally and contextually for people around understanding the gospel. And I know that mission can sometimes be a little bit prickly, which we're not going to go into this podcast, but maybe another time I'd love to talk about it.
We'll do a queer missiology together someday.
My dream. I'm back. So a lot of what I've been doing is learning how do we understand the gospel from the lens and the eyes of a diverse group of people. So spent a number of years doing that work in the Jewish space. And then about 3 years ago, started this fantastic ministry called Kaleidoscope. We are New York based, though we serve people all around the world. Our primary work is to provide opportunities for LGBTQ people to engage with tangible expressions of who Christ is. And we do that in a variety of ways that are super fun and super challenging, but so life-giving. And I am married to a fantastic man named Aaron, and I have 2 kids, Ezra and Jude. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm just delighted to be here.
Yay. No, it's been so fun. I mean, we met each other at a Kaleidoscope event, and then what was that, 2 weeks later, I walk into the coffee shop downstairs and you're there.
And we're straight up neighbors.
Straight up neighbors. I love it. Queering up the Christian world and uptown or something.
Yes.
But from the beginning, Kaleidoscope's amazing, and you have a kaleidoscope of stories to tell, I'm sure. And we could sit here and talk for hours, just the two of us. But I believe that you have a specific story to bring to us today about something related to the intersection of queerness and spirituality. So why don't you share that, and then we'll dive right in.
Yeah, I was talking to my mentor yesterday. This is not my story, but I will get there, I promise.
I love a story before the story.
Yes, the story before the story. Once upon a time yesterday, I was talking to my mentor and, just talking to her about different intersections of faith and queerness. And she too is a queer. She's a queer elder. I'm getting there. And she had said, like, I said, I have to have grace for myself. This is really hard. Da da da. And then I said, it's been really only 5 years since I've been out like publicly into myself. And she goes, girl, it's only been 4 years. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm an absolute baby, but what a wild ride the 4 years has been. So here's my story. And maybe I hope that this is a little different and maybe can expand the way that we think about queerness. So as I mentioned, I grew up in Baltimore and knew that I was queer when I was about 12. Didn't really know anything about bisexuality because we didn't even talk about being gay in the early 2000s, let alone that there were variations of gay or queerness. So I was just like, oh, I guess I'm gay. And went to my mom, tried to like confess and come out to her. It wasn't terrible, but I can't say that it was super affirming and life-giving. So quickly retreated back into the closet and kept it to myself for a number of years, up until 5 years ago. Wow. And yeah, and I'm 37. So it took a while. But when I was in Bible college, I met my now husband, Aaron, and shortly after friendship developed, fell in love, got married. And I remember through our engagement, I had this looming thought and fear. I have to tell him about my identity, this identity that I didn't even own for myself. Like I could not articulate, but I was just like, I need to tell him something because I feel like I would be lying to him if I didn't like confess. So apparently part of this I don't even remember, but I came to him while we were engaged and I was like, hey, I just want you to know, like, I used to think I was gay. That was the closest I could come. And he was like, oh, well, are you gay now? And I was like, oh, heavens no. And he's like, okay, this is not a big deal. Like, we can move past. And I was great. Well, let's never speak of it again. And, that retreated once again deeper into the closet and I've been married for 15 years. I've had an absolutely lovely, lovely marriage. However, this was always something that was in the back of my head in my relationship. Like, do I love my husband completely and utterly? Absolutely. But do I know that there's a part of who I am that I have not expressed to him or anyone else? And it is an active part of the way that I have relationships with people. But I wasn't willing to really engage with that. So it wasn't until I finally admitted to myself of my queer identity, I identify as bisexual. So it wasn't until I finally like came out to myself that I was like, okay, I guess I got to tell my husband, right? Like we have to have a bigger conversation than I used to be gay, which was horribly frightening. Like coming from an evangelical background, growing up Southern Baptist. Sorry, did you hear a beeping?
I did not.
Okay, so I'll back up. It was horribly scary, like growing up Southern Baptist and, really being committed to my partner. Like I love my partner dearly. But I knew I had to be honest with him was one of the scariest things. So, I prayed and I sucked it up and I went to him and I said, hey, I have something to tell you. And I want you to know that I love you. And I want you to know that I have not cheated on you. And I want like all this like prefacing because I was so scared and I was crying. And he was like, are you bisexual? And I was like, oh,
yeah.
Yes, in fact.
Wow.
And, he was like, babe, I already knew. And I'm not like, it wasn't that I already knew that I kind of resent. I don't know if you're like this, Tyler, but there are some people that I've come out to and they're like, that old thing. I knew that for years. And I was like, excuse me, do you know how hard it took me to have this conversation with you? Why didn't you tell me that?
Precisely. Yep.
Right.
Yep. Yep.
No, but it wasn't like that. It was I kind of felt that this was something that was a part of who you were. And you actually tried to tell me a few times.
Wow.
And I had dug so deeply back into the closet, Tyler, that I didn't remember. Like I can only articulate some of the earlier story because of coming out. Like I didn't remember there were multiple conversations that I've had with him throughout our marriage that was me testing the waters. But I didn't know. And he's like, I heard it. I heard it before. And this doesn't like change my love for you. And I know that you deeply love me. And we're gonna walk in this together. And it was one of the most beautiful moments in my marriage. Because it was one of the most vulnerable moments. Like I have had this man has watched me birth 2 children. Like he's seen me go through mental breakdowns, like, you know, highs and lows. Yet this was probably the most vulnerable I could have ever been because I was convinced he was going to leave me, that this was going to be too much for him. But it wasn't. And ever since then, the ways that he has nurtured me as a queer person in our very heteronormative presenting relationship has been so beautiful. The way he has corrected people's assumptions when they meet us, the way that and this is the real joy, the way that he has welcomed queerness into my life and into the lives of the people, into our family and the lives of the people around us has been remarkable. Like it has shown me not just the depth of his love for me and the faithfulness of his love for me and our family, but it's really shown me who the character of God is in relationship. And when I was thinking about telling the story, I was thinking about the story of Ruth and Naomi. And that story was always really significant in my ministry work prior to queer ministry because, you know, I was working in the Jewish context. And as somebody who's not Jewish, I'm Black and Mexican. My husband actually is ethnically Jewish, though identifies religiously as Christian. That narrative was always a big part of the ministry that we did and the way that people saw intercultural relationships, you know, especially Jewish and non-Jewish or Gentile. It was like, oh, well, and people would say, oh, you're like Ruth. You've been, you know, you came into his life and you said, may your people be my people and your family be my family and your God be my God. And I used to kind of hate it. I gotta be honest, because though it was true, I didn't do the work that I did because I met this person and he changed my heart. I did it because I felt like God was calling me into it. And Aaron always knew that and respected that as well. But now I see this narrative in a new way, in the way that Aaron has seen me as this queer woman of faith, and he has become Ruth. You know, he has said, like, may your people be my people and your God be my God. And though our God hasn't changed, who our God is in our relationship and in our lives and the way that we love people and call family, and community, that God has dynamically shifted. Because now this is a God who invites the marginalized and the confused and the array of, you know, experiences, including the queer experience. So yeah, I am so honored and floored by who he has been in my life, my husband has been in my life, and I'm honored and floored by who God has been in our lives and in my life because of the testimony of my husband's relationship. And I last thing I'll say is I tell this story because it's beautiful. I also tell this story because as a bisexual person, this is kind of like a a bit of a thorn in our flesh.
Yeah.
Or, you know, a burden that we have to carry of like, people don't think we're queer enough. There is absolutely bisexual erasure. I went to a queer event not long ago and, you know, talking to people, and I mentioned that I was married to a man, and someone immediately was like, but I thought you said you were queer. And I was like, like, are we like that here? I didn't think we were like that here.
The biphobia and the transphobia that gets so woven into that too. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, that's how we could have that whole conversation. So, you know, like, I have had the feeling in the past 3 years that has led me to feel like, should I be ashamed of my relationship? Should I not talk about the fact that I'm married to a man for fear that people will steal my queer card away from me?
Wow.
But when I look to see what God has done, you know, like, no, I can't do that. You know what I mean? Because this is a testimony of my intersection of queerness and faith and spirituality. And I hope that it gives life, not just to my other bi and pan friends and family, but to all of us, you know, who can remember that God works beyond what we can even just see, that there's something really queer, even deep down beyond what we think is just plain and simple, right?
Amen. Yeah.
So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Stick to it. Keep growing that. Keep unfolding. I mean, I forget the theologian. It's either Catherine Keller or Marjorie Sue Hockey, but talks about a God who is present with us in the process of becoming. Like, God ain't sitting there at the finish line waiting for us to have us all figured out, but she's sitting there dancing with us as we're like, wait, what about this part of myself?
Absolutely.
I love
and
it.
Isn't it remarkable that other people are on that journey with us too? Like that the way that we know, the way that we can see that embodied is in other people who are willing to say, yeah, I want to go on this journey with you.
Which that's like I've talked about elsewhere in this podcast and conversations in life. Like my coming out story, I was 2021 and I was like, oh, like you can't be gay and Christian, that's a sin. And then I met someone who was like, I'm kind of questioning things. So I was like, I'll question that with you. Turns out we dated for 3 years.
That's one way to do it.
But precisely. And I used like in that season, I was saying, well, God is a relational God. And like I needed a relationship. I needed this to be not about like a theoretical issue or an abstract identity, like a label. I needed this to be about a relationship, relationality. And then after that relationship ended, and just through my own growth, I kind of queered that a little bit because I don't like queerness doesn't rely in a queer relationship as your story. Your relationship is queer, but it's not a gay relationship. That doesn't fit. And I think I had to let go of how I thought about my own coming out process in some ways, because I realized like, oh, that's kind of upholding like, well, God's only going to bless you if you're gay and partner versus people who come out on their own. But the bigger thing that I think I was kind of biting into in those early days was realizing like queerness is not something we do on our own. Sometimes we do it in relationships, sometimes we do it in friendship, sometimes we take a relationship that didn't seem queer and we realize it's actually non-normative because we don't have to do things the way we were told to do them. There's so many ways in which we need each other, and it's not just through a gay relationship or a lesbian relationship. And I'm tired of people saying that there's only certain ways to be gay, certain ways to be queer, and that there's homonormativity is the scholarly term that we use for that. But that's something that I am thinking about your story. Like, it's interesting to me that years ago you like had a proto coming out experience. You try to come out to Aaron, and it's like I think some queer folk may look back on those experiences and negate that as like, well, I was still messing up, like I wasn't true to myself yet. In reality, you were doing the best with what you knew to do. Like you didn't have a framework for coming out as bisexual. You had a framework for acknowledging this part of who you are with this language. And you use the language, I think, of like this identity that was within you that you couldn't even name. Just think points to the fact that queerness is not this static identity, but this process, this feeling that we have because a certain part of who we are doesn't match up with the scripts that we are given. But that's what is so important, I think, about the work that you do, the work we do in LGBTQIA plus ministry development, illuminating things is a lot of people don't have scripts. They don't have, they don't know
Yeah.
what they can do. And so they're doing the best with what they can do. And we don't, those of us who are on the other side of being out can't look at other folk and say, well, you're doing it wrong. Let me help you get it right.
No,
Rather, like, let's
no.
expand the resources at hand.
Absolutely. I think because we were there, like, lest we forget
Mm-hmm.
that every one of us has had a moment where we didn't have words for this. And maybe for some of us, we got it early and we were 8 and we knew, and that good for you.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not
Exactly.
the vast majority of people. And something, you're so good with names of scholars and authors, and I'm terrible at it. So no one will get credit for any of the things I say. But I'm currently doing some work on understanding queer kinship
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
queer kinship theology and what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
something that I was reading yesterday was in thinking about theory and methodology and how we queer things,
Mm-hmm.
um, how important and essential it is to listen to the silence.
Wow.
And I think we're so good at
Uh-huh.
listening to what we can hear, what we have a framework for.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think good spiritual development, good theology, good listening to the Holy Spirit is listening to silence.
Mm-hmm.
What can't
Mm-hmm.
be said?
Mm-hmm.
What hasn't been said?
Mm-hmm.
And what hasn't been heard because no one has asked?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, that was a lot of my coming out was I didn't have a framework because there was no context for it. No one was listening to my silence.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know how to listen to my own silence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a practice that I want to adopt is doing that as we interact and love on our queer neighbors. It's not just listening to what they tell us. It's not just listening or creating a framework for it because, dude, we're queer. We don't have a freaking framework. Like, that's another thing I was reading yesterday is
Mm-hmm.
someone was saying, like, anthropologists we are an anomaly. They want to put us in a box, but you can't. Like, we are a problem.
Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
a problem. But I want to listen to the silence because the silence is where Jesus is, because that's where he dwells. Like, that's what he did. He went off into silent places to be with the Father. So can I join people in their silence? Can I join myself in my silence?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. And again, like, just bringing it back to my story, I think my husband was able to join me in my silence, and he came out for me. Like, literally, he put the words in my mouth, which was a blessing. He wasn't stealing it. He blessed me with that.
Because he was present to you in that whole process. And that, like, and that's what's beautiful to me about it, is it sounds like he was, I mean, aware of the scripts for what a good Christian marriage was supposed to look like, but he knew that there was something bigger than that. And he was present to you in ways that you couldn't be present to yourself, which
Absolutely.
is such a queer form of spirituality in my book.
Yeah. Yeah. And a good, like, charge for the rest of us. Like, I want to do that. That's what I love doing for other people.
It's interesting that, like, as soon as we have names for something, we start to attach expectations to it. As you know, I took a class this last semester on ancient Judaism and biblical interpretation, and kind of talking about the emergence and the origins of Christianity, and how it took decades, if not centuries, for people to say, well, this is what Christianity is. And that immediately erased all of the becoming up into that moment. And we now, like, think, well, the Gospels have everything that we need to know, but what about Mary Magdalene and what she was doing? What about the other early Christians? Like, that's a huge conversation in scholarship now.
Yeah.
But it's analogous, I think, what's happened in the queer movement over the past few decades. Like, a lot of my interest is, like, what were LGBTQ folk talking about in the 90s and what have we lost in the past 30 years, or pre-Stonewall even? Like, how can we connect some threads better? Because as soon as it really got taken off the ground, like, what it meant to be gay, what it meant to be queer, LGBTQ, like, had certain scripts attached to it. And we similarly need to do the work to say, like, what other ways are there to be queer, or are there to be who we are to be in this world that don't fit into the rainbow capitalism that's kind of taken over a lot of the
Absolutely.
mainstream narrative, which we love representation. I'm so thankful for Love, Simon, and that stream of queer media. We need it all, but we can't. As soon as we start drawing circles around things to close things in instead of keeping things expansive, we start to erase things and stop paying
Yeah.
attention to the silence, which
Yeah, I
is
think both. Like labels are good because if I didn't have for me, if I didn't have a label, then I wouldn't have words for what, for my identity. I wouldn't have bisexuality. And I think labels or structures also create community. It's because I can say I'm bisexual that I'm friends with you. It's because I can say and know the character of who I am that I can go to Henrietta Hudson and find my people. They're not just my people because they use words. They're my people because we have a shared experience that is only possible because we're able to dialogue about it, because we're able to recognize those shared experiences.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, we have a God that like honors those things, like honors that culture, honors who we are and who we've created to be, and then says like, and then I can not just like supersede it, but I can be in it. I can go through it. I can be around it. I can speak to it. I can be on top of it. Like, and that's the joy. That's the wonder. That's the eternity of learning and knowing the ever dynamic love of God.
Talking this morning about how like creativity is such a spiritual practice because God is creativity and queerness is creativity because we're creating things, and that feels pertinent to what you were just saying.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of labels and amen. Speaking of labels and words and creating things, one of the things I've been asking everybody in this podcast is to create a definition, not a boundary, not a limit, but a springboard of a definition maybe for the words that we're really talking about in this queerness and spirituality. So as we're coming close to our time now, I believe I'm kind of lost track of it because I've been having so much fun.
We're just having fun.
Talking about our favorite things. I wonder if you had to define the word queerness, how might you define that word? Not limit it, but open it up with the definition.
Yeah, I think queerness is the experience of understanding self and the world that we live in, that breaks free from binaries and breaks free from fear, and standards that suppress. Queerness is freedom. Queerness is knowing something that is a journey of discovery, and it's like this delight. It's this discovery of something beautiful that only you can tap into. So like it reminds me of eating a chocolate that has some kind of filling, and like you just get to that center and you're like, like I just unlocked something that I didn't even know that was there. And now like everything's changed, So yeah, that's queerness. That's queerness to me.
Something I'm taking away from all of this that you just named is like the ways in which queerness is it's a two-step dance of like understanding and like it's an understanding that doesn't have itself figured out. It's an awareness like, oh, I can name that now, but I'm not done in becoming who I'm going to be. Like, oh, this chocolate's delicious and I'm going to savor this, but I'm going to eat some more later.
Yes. Yeah. Queerness is heaven. Like, is that not heaven? Like, I get a piece of it now. I see my trans friends help me with this constantly because they have something in their queerness that I wish that I had. Like, they have a nugget of like, I know something deep about my spirit and myself that this body cannot tell the story of. It's just not working it. Wow. So that is supernatural. Like that is holy. Yet it will not, it can't, like it's only going to be fully discovered or embodied whenever, like later on, whenever that is, you
The
know.
already but not yet.
Yes, it is entirely the already but not yet, and that is us. Like we get something, and it doesn't always make sense, but it's a glimpse of heaven.
Queerness as eschatological imagination. Oh, we're being theologians now. Well, to finish on a theological note, then, I mean, you could probably take out the word queerness and put spirituality and everything that you just said, and it would still ring true. We love it. How would you, in turn, with this queer hermeneutic, queer perspective, how would you define spirituality for yourself, for others?
Yeah. I think the first word is a journey. Like spirituality is a journey. It is to use, you know, a Yiddish phrase. It's a schlep. It's you know, like it's fun, but it's rough and it's hard. But spirituality is a sense of perspective. It offers an awakening. It says that what I see is real and true, and there's also something deeply real and true that I have not seen, or I don't see, or that I feel that can't be actualized. Spirituality is absolutely 100% communal. You cannot be spiritual alone. You can try, you can start, but spirituality is an exchange of love and truth and support and affection. And two of my favorite words from one of my favorite people in the world, Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil, who does a lot of work in racial reconciliation. Spirituality is reconciliation. Like it is reconciling, it is renewing what not just what was meant to be, but what will be and what is becoming.
Oh, I love that. Again, we could put queerness and spirituality for everything.
Right? Absolutely.
Amen. It is. I mean, like, we love private. I love journaling. I love praying by myself. I love reading things on my own, but we need each other for this. And that just connects back to like these labels that we use for ourselves, this language that we use to articulate who we are. We don't make that up on our own. We need that from each other. We need conversations like this to unpack our journey. We need fellow travelers to carry the bags for us when it does get to be a schlep.
Absolutely.
We need others like your husband to say, no, I see you. I think this is what you are. Is this a word that you're looking for? Which can be true about our sexuality, our gender identity, how we want to choose to do our domestic, professional, personal lives, or how we are understanding our relationship with the God who is present to us in this process of becoming.
Amen. So true. I love it.
Dang,
I don't even know what more to say. I mean, that's just perfect.
I mean, the journey's just begun.
It is.
Spirituality is a highway, and I want to ride it all night long. Uni Rascal Flats would be in my mind at the end of this podcast.
As long as somebody else, we co-drive, because I'm not driving the whole time.
Hallelujah. Maybe God is the bus driver, and we're just all like, we bought our tickets. We just
okay, I'm down. That sounds good.
I don't drive anymore. I don't want to drive anymore. People say, what's your favorite thing about living in New York City? And I say, I'm on a journey with other people and they're driving the trains and buses.
Exactly. You are literally on a communal journey every day.
There's something about the car sickness I get now too, and how that's part of the journey. Sometimes we get queasy as we're figuring ourselves out, but that's for some other sermon illustrate.
Oh my gosh, so true.
Well, Elizabeth, I am so glad to be co-piloting, co-navigating these journeys with you. And already you've taught me a lot about what queerness means to me and how to see God within it. And I know that those of us, or those of you who are watching and listening along, hopefully feel a few steps further into your own journey too. So thank you again, Elizabeth.
Such a pleasure. And I realized also I never said anything about Kaleidoscope. I didn't even mention it.
we brought up the name.
Let me do a slight plug to say, I'm so glad we're doing this journey together. And I'm glad that I can represent this amazing organization, Kaleidoscope, that, yeah, I know I said a little bit about it, but we're working in the city to really bridge the gaps and provide queer people a place to explore faith. Even those who don't come from Christian backgrounds, because we all need that, right? So I'm so glad that, Tyler, you've been such a great encourager and cheerleader for us, and looking forward to seeing how God continues to use our relationship.
Yeah, same.
It's gonna be good times.
And we'll share some information on how folk can find Kaleidoscope along with the episode. So when you're listening along, friends, make sure you click the links in the bio to find Kaleidoscope online and on socials and everything. And 2, go check out christchurchnyc.online/pride. This Illuminate podcast is leading up to our Illumination month that is Pride. We have everything from picnics and kickoff parties to our Illuminate Pride service on Thursday, June 27, in which we'll be together in the sanctuary here at Christ Church, celebrating the good news that queerness and spirituality wrap up inside of each other, and God is bringing us all on this process of becoming together. So I'm excited for what's ahead. I'm excited for this story to continue unlocking things for other people. So thank you again, Elizabeth. Thank you again for all of you who are listening, and we'll see y'all later. Bye, friends.
Blessings, everybody. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride. Bye, y'all.